Good morning, everybody. Pastor Stitch, Narrow Path Christian Church, BC, Bay City, Michigan, also the North Central Chaplain for Broken Chains JC. Good morning, Rhonda. Good morning, Random. For those of you that come on a little bit later, glad to have you here. Hopefully, it's my prayer that I'm having an impact in lives. Quite honestly, it's really hard sometimes to continue in this path that God has me on without seeing evidence. And that's called faith, and I know that, but sometimes it's difficult. So I appreciate you being here with me this morning as we get into it. So it is November 19th, 2023. We will look at Proverbs chapter 19, and I am going to look at verse 10. The verse 10 says this: luxury is not appropriate for a fool. How much less for a slave to rule over princes? As I was looking at that this morning, I realized, it's funny that we don't pay much attention to the fact that all of the New Testament pretty much is backed up by the Old. Jesus was having a conversation with his disciples, and they were arguing over something. And he pulls them all together and says, "What are you arguing about?" And they just clam up because they don't want to tell him. And he says this to them in Mark chapter 9, verse 35. He called the 12 to himself. He said to them, "If anyone would be first, he must be last of all, and servant of all." As I was looking at verse 10 this morning, I realized this: luxury is not appropriate for a fool. How much less for a slave to rule over princes? We're all called royalty when we accept Jesus Christ as Lord. And yet, do we not want to rule over everyone? We want to find that position of authority. We want to find that position of whatever it might be, so that we can be in charge. Jesus said you need to be a slave. Solomon said, if you're a slave, it's really not good that you rule over anyone. Well, how am I supposed to lead then, you might think? Well, that's a good question. It comes from just loving God and serving Him. Having a passion for Him that overcomes everything else. There's a reason that Solomon also wrote the Song of Songs and portrayed the image of the husband and wife erotic relationship as that intimacy that we should have with God. Now, I'm not saying it's supposed to be erotic, but erotic intimacy with your wife or your husband is as close to that intimate relationship pictured in the world we live in as what you could get to with what God wants to have a relationship with you. But it requires your part. That's the crazy thing. You can't have an intimate relationship. You can't have an erotic relationship with your husband or your wife. And yes, I said husband and wife. Outside of marriage, not okay. That's called fornication. It's the most talked about sin in the Bible. Just a fact. And I'm not judging, because I've lived there. I know. But what I'm saying is that intimate relationship, you can't have it if you don't participate in it. You can have a close relationship, but you can't have a close, intimate relationship unless you participate in the other side of it. Now, that picture and what it looks like in relationship to God, that's a little bit different. It's something that maybe sometime I can talk about. I don't have time to get into it today. But what I am saying is today, since we're called to be servants to all, the only way that we could do that is if we put our focus and our attention towards the one we want to be most intimate with. And that should be God. And if it's not, then we're chasing something other than our salvation. And we're told we need to work out our salvation with fear and trembling. And so it's important to remember that as well. Good morning, Chris. Glad you made it. I hope for the rest of you that you got something out of this today. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. God bless.